Good evening and welcome to the March 8th, 2023 East Lansing Planning Commission meeting. Peter, would you please call the roll?
I'd be happy to. Chair Sullivan.
Here.
Vice Chair Bowman.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine.
Here.
Commissioner Hendricks is not currently here, but we are expecting him. Commissioner Boyd.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Denal.
Here.
Commissioner Wagner is absent tonight. We do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Is there a motion for approval of tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Second. Support.
Moved by Vice Chair Bowman, support by Williams. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Is there a motion for approval of the minutes of the February 8th, 2023 Planning Commission meeting?
So moved. Support.
Moved Williams, seconded by Lapine. Any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. On to item number 2, committee reports. I don't believe we have any committee reports. So item number 3, staff reports. Mr. Menzer?
Hello. Good to see you all again. So we haven't met since, or you haven't met since February 8th, and the February 22 meeting was canceled due to inclement weather. So the agenda tonight reflects what would have happened on the February 22 Planning Commission agenda. Just a quick recap of recent council items that the Planning Commission worked on. So at last night's meeting, council agreed to set public hearings for both the items that are on tonight's agenda, on the business agenda. 3400 West Road and Falcon Pointe, both are site plan applications. Those public hearings are scheduled for the March 21 council agenda. So the appropriate notices have gone out for that, and all that, of course, is pending tonight's discussion. That can all be rearranged if necessary. But typically, we just try to get them moving through the process as quickly as possible, and can always change as necessary. On the March 14th council discussion, I'm just a look ahead. March 14 council discussion only meeting, so that's next Tuesday night. The staff is bringing forward the Valley Court Park Pavilion project to council to get some direction. I can give a quick recap on that. They haven't received, so there's been no updates to the plans. We haven't, you are up to date on all the feedback that has been received, so all letters have been on your agenda. I haven't received anything new since for at least a couple weeks. So what we plan on doing with that is really just going to council to get some direction on where do we go from here. So I'm going to tell the story of kind of how we got here, and that's a little bit of a longer story, considering that it started with someone else in my department and it's kind of passed through some hands. And really just describe everything that has gone into the project so far, the money that's been spent, the consulting firms that have been engaged, the plans that have been prepared, and then in more detail, the feedback that's been received. I'm qualifying the feedback as mixed, probably at best, the written feedback. And then, the discussion of where this plan has, what eyes have been on this plan in terms of groups in the community. Really, and then what we're hoping to get out of that is just some direction, kind of knowing I guess the question posed to council, knowing what you know now, following the presentation, we're going to be looking for some direction on where to go from there. And I guess, the options are pursue the grant, proceed with the project in its current form, in some other form, or potentially cease, take what we've got now, maybe double back with the tweak planning efforts, maybe look at the larger area there. Before the grant came along, there was, I wasn't on staff at the time, there were some discussions about looking at the entire kind of Valley Court area, more of a holistic area approach. And I think the grant somewhat interrupted that, and COVID, from what I understand. So COVID first, grant second, interrupted that process. So that discussion on the larger scale didn't happen. So that's one option. So I'll be presenting a couple different kind of options and where things might go from there. But the other option that council may choose, and I'm not speaking for them at all, is stop now. Maybe make what we've learned part of a future planning effort. Tweak the plans in some future endeavor. Okay, so looking even further ahead, the March 21st City Council meeting, planning on having the rezoning. So there has been a request for the extension of the conditional rezoning of the property that is, I call it Building C. I've heard Parcel C, Lot C, but it's the third phase of the Park District project. Park District being the Graduate Hotel and the Abbott apartments there. And there is a third phase also called Building C, just I guess locally, that entails the construction of a building that would have affordable units on the site. So I think I've told that story before, but just a quick recap. Essentially Convexity, the developer that currently owns the property and that was engaged with the city from the get-go, at least in the iteration of the plan that made its way to construction, has contacted the city about not proceeding with the third phase. They're working with to identify another party to potentially take over that obligation. So the city's been working with another company that is potentially interested in approaching the city with a development agreement. So we will update council on that. But in the meantime, there's kind of two timelines. There's the development agreement that runs, I think, until 2025, and then there's the rezoning it was a conditional rezoning. It was approved for 54 months from like a date, I want to say October 3rd in 2018, something like that. Anyways, fast forward to now, it expires in, I think, April 3rd. So the party that has the rezoning is going to be requesting an extension on that. There is a provision in the city's ordinance that allows for an extension of a conditional rezoning. Essentially what it boils down to is demonstrating to council that there's a viable project and that the change in zoning is still needed to accomplish that. So that will be the burden of proof to get council to extend that rezoning. So we're putting that on the March 21st. Now, I'm not expecting that the larger discussion on Building C might necessarily be a part of that meeting. I think it's inherently part of the conversation, but I can't yet confirm, I guess, whether or not that's going to be on that agenda for sure. And then the third thing that would be on that agenda would be the extension of the outdoor dining. So for the last couple of years, council has adopted kind of a one-year set of rules to enable outdoor dining for restaurants in the city. And this all stemmed out of what originally I think was kind of more of an emergency measure to get people outside during COVID that morphed into kind of this year-to-year ordinance it basically allows a restaurant, say take Barrio, for example, downtown on Albert. They can submit a site plan to me as the planning administrator, the zoning administrator, and as long as it meets standards for like public, allowing thoroughfare and allowing emergency access and that kind of thing, that we would approve it. So that's what we've done for the last couple of years. The plan a year ago was to kind of create this omnibus ordinance that really set different standards for a long-term ordinance that would allow outdoor dining in perpetuity, not for everyone. It would create a set of standards for this, so we wouldn't have to keep coming back every year. That didn't happen for a variety of reasons. So hopefully in the future that will happen. But for now, what we're proposing is just to get something approved so that business can continue outside for the next year. So more to come on that. Stay tuned for that discussion. Beyond that, we don't have any official kind of land use applications in the pipeline. We've got people kicking the tires on things and talking about submitting something, but I don't have anything in right now. So what I would anticipate, and certainly with your input, for the next couple meetings at least, continue the Shaping the Avenue discussion, the form-based code discussion, and any other policy initiative kind of things that we want to touch on. I think you all know, but this is my last planning commission meeting. I took a job with Delta Township as the Community and Economic Development Director. So my last day is effectively next Wednesday, but technically Friday. I've got a couple days planned. So I've enjoyed working with all of you. I've loved working with planning commissions and in all forums over the years. So I'm going to be doing something a little bit different at Delta, but I will stay up on what you're up to, and certainly I will be a resource to the best of my ability within reason for the staff that's here to help you. So As you probably know, we have some vacancies to fill in our division. I want to give you a little lay of the land, so have a second. We had Darcy Schmidt, who was with the city for over 17 years. She resigned her post to take a job at the city of Battle Creek. Her position is currently vacant. Then we have myself, they'll be leaving soon. We do have Taylor and Rebecca in the back, and they're both very competent staff, and they're going to help you. The announcement was made, I think it was public. The city manager is bringing someone on to serve as in an interim role for our department. So that's going to be covered, and then we have posted the other positions. So we're hoping to get more people on soon. So I'm expecting this just to be a lull, and we're going to have more troops coming soon. So we will continue to serve you as well as we can in the meantime. That's my report.
Thank you, Peter. Any questions from commissioners?
I just want to, I think you had said that the Valley Court Pavilion that's going to go before council next Tuesday, it's whatever the current plan is, which has been reviewed but not recommended by this body and potentially reviewed but not approved by the Historic District Commission?
That is, yes, sorry if I skipped over that.
No, that's fine. You sort of went up to it and touched it.
So there are two active, there's an active site plan application and an active certificate of appropriateness, actually two certificate of appropriateness requests for the Historic District Commission. One for the BWL building, there were some improvements proposed for that, and then one for the overall, I'll say, pavilion and related improvements, since everything is in the Historic District there. Those are on tentative hold. So I'll recognize this is a somewhat of a unique scenario and approach to this, but kind of given the feedback from the community, after talking with staff and talking to administration at the city, it seemed prudent at this point to kind of pause of where we're at right now, kind of given what we know and what we've heard, go to council, give them the scoop, and then get some direction and go back from there. So if they want to move, I don't mean to emphasize if they want to move along with the project, then I would expect those applications to come back to the respective bodies and proceed in the manner, what in the same form or in another form. I just don't have that information as of yet. But you're right, those are still kind of active out there and will need to be resolved before, if council wants to move ahead with that will all have to be addressed before it goes any further.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, are there any commissioner announcements? Also none. On to item number 5, communications from citizens. Item 5.1, written communications. I did not see any in the packet.
There are no written communications. I did hand out a plan. I can go over it when we get to that item, but there was a plan, a physical plan that was handed out here that is not included in the meeting pack, the online meeting packet tonight.
Okay. Item number 5.2, verbal from the audience. This is for typically items that are off of the agenda. However, we're not doing any public hearings tonight. Strictly, we're doing old business. 3 items are up. So we have a member of the public now.
Good evening. Matt Hagan, Hagan Realty, 927 East Grand River. I guess I didn't initially come to mention anything about the Valley Court development, but as long as it was mentioned, I guess it refreshed my memory when I was reviewing the packet last month. I did notice the plan and reviewed it real quickly. To be honest, I wasn't a fan of it. It looked like there was a large amount of paving going to be taking place in what's now currently a large amount of green space. So I know Bert Seafarth had written a letter kind of against the layout, and I guess I would second a lot of his comments about some of the design and whatnot with that development. So that was number 1. Number 2, the main reason I came to speak is about the form-based code. I may or may not hang around to see some of that presentation. I spent a lot of time dealing with this a couple of years ago, I guess, when it was originally being talked about. Wasn't a huge fan of some of the aspects of it then, and still not a huge fan of it now. I don't love the idea of a form-based code that basically tells me what I can and cannot do, building-wise, material-wise. I think there's so many different variances when it comes to doing a development or redevelopment, and having something that's just established, it's not always going to fit. It's not always going to allow it to work. There was silly stuff in there about the size of awnings and the size of shutters. We have buildings now that have awnings of certain size that have worked for a lot of years, and under this new form-based code, they wouldn't be even allowed. Just to give an example. From my memory, a lot of the redevelopment required access from alleys behind properties. Currently, all of the neighborhoods in the area, for the most part, are designed with streets and driveways off of those streets. And so, it seems to me like the form-based code would obviously work in bare land where you're going in with a new development starting from scratch, but trying to overlay it in an existing situation doesn't seem to work for me. I'm sure you guys won't be able to see this, but this is the drawing, I guess, of the proposed area. One additional thing that was kind of surprising to me is that on Albert Street, it looked, maybe I'm wrong in this, but it looked like it included the property along Albert south of the park, those properties south side of Albert Street, but not on the north side of Albert Street, and not around the other side on Stoddard around the park. So when you're doing redevelopment stuff, it would seem you're not going to be bothering anybody in the park. I don't know why you wouldn't include parcels around the park. It seems like those areas would be a lot easier to do some redevelopment in. And so I guess just the layout of that seemed a little bit questionable to me. If it is something that's going to move forward, the dash lines didn't make a whole lot of sense to not include some of those areas around there. As Mr. Menser just mentioned, staff is in flux right now. I'm not sure it's a great time to be taking on this initiative with limited staff to be able to monitor it, to work out the kinks. This is not going to be something that's going to go very smoothly, in my opinion, when it comes to submissions. If people decide to move forward, there's going to be a lot of questions, and I just don't think it's a good time, given the situation with staff, to move forward. And lastly, I was actually reviewing the Historic District Commission. They're making some changes, or suggesting to make some changes to some of their code. Not that I necessarily agree with it, but they were taking a lot of the power away from staff, it appeared, and requiring just about everything to go to the commission for a lot of changes. And so it seems like one commission is wanting more power and more stuff to come before them, and this is somewhat taking your decisions away from you and just making it supposedly smoother. So I guess it would make more sense to me that both commissions would have similar type of developer-friendly ideas. So I will do a card, and if you have any questions, I guess I'll be here. Thank you.
Seeing none, are there any?
Hi. Short person. Nancy Maher, Prime Housing Group, 1390 East Grand River Avenue. Most of our properties are on Grand River from Hagedorn. We own the property where the flower shop is, and then 6 buildings down. So Dan would remember that our properties are in the East Village, which is the first properties that the city did form-based coding on. And it was very aspirational. And there's not been a lot of redevelopment, and I know that the code has changed. This was the 2000s when they went through, and the code had to, they had to make a lot of changes to the code because they wanted to make it a requirement for owner-occupied, which means you change from apartments to condos. It's a completely different business model. And I know that changes have been made to that in order for, like, the hub to be built, because that's not owner-occupied. But in terms of form-based code, I know that the city wants to have a vision of what they want an area to look like, and I respect that. But I would highly recommend that you really take a look at the success of the mixed-use developments in our town and in our neighboring towns. Because requiring on certain situations where you have to have retail or restaurant on the first floor, especially when that property is being built right on the front lot line, there's not a whole lot of success going on with that business model. There's a lot of examples of it. There's a new build in the University Edge. I don't really see a whole lot of their first floor property. Maybe they're still renting those out, but it's kind of tricky if you're a person like me that drives by, and if you can't find the parking, it's not really enticing for you to stop. I know the Element struggled for a long time. That's across from the hub. The Element struggled for a long time. I don't know if the attorneys moved back in there or what they ended up doing with that, but that's been empty forever. Skyview's been empty. Their first floor, is that Lansing? Anyways, there's all these examples of mixed-use developments because that's what was trending, that's what was popular. But I would ask the city and the commission to really take a look at, is this a successful business model? We may want this in our town, but if it's not a successful business model and that space is going to be empty, then what has been accomplished? And there is enough data at this point to look at it. And developers, I worked on a grad class this fall, and developers are looking at this and they realize if you don't pull in and drive and see where you're going, where you're going to park, you're not going to stop. And so they don't want to build right on the lot line. So just keep that in mind. And I worked on the form-based coding for the East Village. We have one property that's within what I understand to be the target area for this form-based coding. We have Stoddard Apartments, which is 134 Stoddard. So that, I'm seeing nodding heads, so that is within that area. It's a cute little building, it's great. No plans to change anything, it's a great building. But that's my feedback in terms of the previous lack of success with that business model. There's all kinds of, right by the Big B's, they turned that into a workout center, 300 grand. They turned that into a workout center because they couldn't find retail for that first floor. It's just not the best successful model. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate both your comments. I think this is helpful perspective for us as we continue to have these conversations, and we'll continue to have them in the future.
Thanks.
Hi, Alice Drager. Just wanted to share some information that I have about the Valley Court Park grant, and also to say I'm incredibly sad to see Peter leaving. I think it is so rare to have somebody so precise and attentive, and it's hard to imagine we're going to find someone to replace you. So thank you for your service. A few of you raised questions about what the grant itself had said to the MEDC, so I decided to look at that because I realized I didn't know that either. So I'm just going to provide you some information about that. I obtained the grant materials through the Freedom of Information Act. The grant application itself, I had to actually go to MEDC because the prior staff person to Peter who had put it in didn't download their application. So when I FOIA'd it from the city didn't have it, which meant his department didn't actually have the grant application. So I had to FOIA it from the MEDC and get it from them. So my point is they may not know what was in there because it was staff people who were previous, who wrote it, and they didn't keep a copy of it. So it turns out that it is ARPA money, which I didn't really understand. And that's really important to understand because there's huge time limits on it, but there's also limits to what ARPA money is allowed to be used for. So that helps explain what is in the grant itself, the grant application, which are frankly some curious claims, I would have to say. One is trying to speak to the ARPA desire to get food to people who are isolated during COVID. And so it describes my neighborhood, Oakwood, as a food desert. Which comes as a surprise to me since I shop at Whole Foods all the time. My neighborhood is not a food desert. The students in my neighborhood accidentally cause what's called the census tract data on the poverty because they're on their parents' money, and so they don't make very much money, so they appear to the government, the silly government, which doesn't look deeper than an inch, the federal government, they appear to be poor. So the students who are driving $60,000 vehicles and having DoorDash come up to their doors are being described in this grant as living in a food desert. Secondly, the BWL building is described as blight, which came as a shock to me and I think would come as a shock to the Historic District Commission. But part of the reason it's described as blight is because ARPA money is supposed to be used for dealing with inner city blight. So it's basically described as kind of inner city blight. Third, there is a claim that there were tons of meetings before the grant application went in and everybody's very excited about it. Well, I guess it doesn't say everybody's excited about it, but it does say there were tons of meetings about it, which I don't recall, but it's possible I missed them because there was a period when I wasn't paying attention, and it's possible that did happen. And then the last thing that surprised me was that it promised a year-round farmers market, a 12-month pavilion. So these are not really promises in the grant application. What it is, of course, a pitch. That's what happens with a grant is you make a pitch. And all of this was pitched directed at the ARPA limitations. The letter of intent that was, the non-binding letter of intent that was signed by the city, again, prior to Peter, with MEDC actually requires a grant agreement by March 15th, which I just found out about, and that is Wednesday. And so the original plan, as Peter described it, for March 14th City Council meeting was to go and say, are we really going forward with this? Because there's been so much mixed feelings and negative feelings about paving over the big central part of the park. You know, I think it's possible we're going to morph this and do something different. People have had interesting ideas. But the original plan was to kind of go to council and just say, you know, are we going to go forward with this? Now it appears that there's actually likely to be some kind of vote at council. So it's not, I don't think, going to be a discussion meeting. There are other things that were supposed to be discussion that are turning into voting items on the council agenda. So the plan, as Peter described it to me in email this evening, is that there could be potentially a vote by City Council to do something with regard to the grant agreement. I don't know what that would look like. It makes me a little worried, mostly because I think we have this habit of like letting grants lead us. We all do that, letting the money lead us. So I think this is stuff maybe you want to know about. Figure out, where do we go from here? I mean, it's hard to walk away from $1 million. On the other hand, the city also has to put up over $1 million for this grant, and it's not at all clear where that money's coming from either. It could come from the city's ARPA money, but there were other marks on that money, so that's also not clear. So that's kind of what I found out, and we'll do a story on Eli about it as soon as everybody stops getting locked down, and we'll attach those materials so that you'll have those materials if you want to look at them. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. On that, I'll just briefly say I think it would be a huge missed opportunity for us to not be able to figure something else out for this park. We did outline a lot of the concerns that we had at previous planning commission meetings. I don't necessarily want to rehash those, but I'm optimistic that we can continue having discussions and try to make something work with that space. Is there any other members of the public that wish to come forward before the commission? All right. Seeing none, we have no public hearings tonight, so on to item number 7. Item 7.1 is an application for a site plan approval to construct a 23,000 square foot industrial building at 3400 West Road. Peter?
Thank you very much. So as noted, this item was originally scheduled, the public hearing was on February 8th, originally scheduled for potential action on the 22nd, and now we're here on March 8th. So as the meeting was starting here, I handed out something from the applicant. What you should have are elevations, and there's one civil set, civil being the engineering reference, and that's in front of Joseph. Those items are not in the online meeting packet. I absolutely recognize that. We'll add them after this. We'll make sure that they're all accommodated for online after this. But so the elevations are stemming from request from staff to have elevations. We were looking for the exterior materials, the height of the building, and what it's going to look like in more detail. So those have been provided. The civil set are in response to some technical questions from their engineering department. So that's, and I'm not sure that you'll be able to see that and know that all the engineering letter is in your meeting packet, but I'm not sure we'd be able to go through and point all those out right now. But that's the intent of that. Yes, so that's that part of it. What I've prepared here in the staff memo is a recommendation. So we write all these recommendations in the affirmative, and then if they fail, they fail. But this is written to recommend approval with conditions of the proposed project. And I've got 19 conditions on here, and I want to just go through those. I'll hit the high points. I'm not going to read them all. Because there's a couple items that that are not yet part of the application package, but in my opinion, they're items that are things that we can get down the road as this project progresses, but that's certainly up to you guys and how you want to handle this. So as always, we write these like in accordance with the plans that you've seen, and that's to tie the approval to the specific set of plans. Further, we're asking for building elevations. As you know, those have been handed out, so that's what's in front of you there. So we were looking for the height, the type of materials, and then any areas where signage may be posted. I just want to go through, make sure the site plan had to be revised to address those comments in the letter from Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, which engineering. The applicant has to provide the public art deposit or provide public art in accordance with our ordinance prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy. We've got required information on exterior lighting, so whether that's on poles or whether they're on the building, so that's type, height, location, and then a photometric plan. And then we've got some standards associated with that. And then there is a tentative landscape plan or a landscape plan on the site plan that's in the meeting packet. However, our ordinance does require that the landscape plan be submitted by sealed by a landscape architect. And also they need to show more detail, like the type, height, and placement of all those materials. So it's a fairly typical condition that would be on a project to provide a final landscape plan, because those sometimes can be developed along the way. But the plan that has been submitted does show the general layout and of how landscape is going to be on the site. On the site plan, there's an area called identified as future building area and future parking area. The condition that I've put in here would be that this site plan approval would not cover those parts because we don't have the information on that yet, and that a separate site plan application would be required in the future should the applicant want to build the parking for that future building, the building itself, or both. Let's see. And then right now because there is that future area, there's curb and gutters not shown on the eastern side of the proposed parking lot on the current plan. So the applicant either has to provide that curb and gutter or seek a waiver from the city engineer, which is an option that's listed in our ordinance. If you'll remember, this property was rezoned as a part of a conditional rezoning. So it's encumbered by conditions related to limitations on the use of the land. Now, the use of the land proposed is an allowed use. The rezoning conditions prohibited uses that were more of an industrial type nature, and also marijuana. So, and then there were also some kind of performance standards that would limit potential impacts from an industrial type use on the property. So in my opinion, this proposed use meets the conditions that were from that conditional rezoning, which was ordinance 1515. Before anything can happen on the site, there has to be a tree removal land clearing permit that happens through our city engineer's office. The rest of this stuff's pretty boilerplate outside of the shared access agreement. So whenever we have an instance like this where there are two properties where one could potentially limit access to another, even though today it's owned by the same owners, in the future that might not always be the case. So we try to ensure that there is an easement in place so that no one blocks one of the other parties out of access to the road. So the property owner is aware of this, and I have it as into time with the certificate of occupancy for the building. So that's just a rundown of the conditions. Besides that, other than the site plan that's in the packet and the supplemental info in front of you, that's what we have today. So there is a motion to recommend approval for consideration, and the applicant's here if you have any questions. I'm certainly available. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Always a pleasure to be before this commission. I think the supplement that we've given you this evening describes a lot better about what the building would look like, and as we've stated in our previous discussions here, we're interested in building a building that is architecturally suitable for the area and has some permanence to it. And I'd also like to point out one of the things that has occurred with this type of pre-engineered metal building is that our energy code has changed. I mean, for a lot of reasons, our energy code has changed. So in many years past, or in fact, the building that sits directly to the east of this one would be constructed with a base of block and then some metal siding, basically, and then it's insulated on the inside, and the roof would be of similar construction. That isn't really an option anymore, or it is an option. However, the things that we would be required to do to achieve it are suboptimal, I would say. You end up with double layers of bad insulation and some other thickness issues in the wall. So the way that we've approached this is to move to an insulated metal panel, and that's stated in the notes on the first page, I believe it is. And I'll give you, I imagine Vice Chair Bowman doesn't necessarily need this lesson, but I'm glad to provide a little bit of background on insulated metal panels. And so this is a monolithic structure, which is composed of basically a skin on the exterior, a skin on the interior, and then a solid layer of insulation in between. Either it varies in what it might be depending on the performance requirement of the panel, but per excuse me, per inch of panel, the R value or the insulating value is incredibly high. So we're looking at the moment at a 4-inch panel, which puts us at R32 on the walls, and maybe your house right now, R16 would be hopeful, I think. And then the roof, actually, I believe the current requirement is R30 for new construction, and we're likely to exceed that by maybe another 10 points, I would think. And that all sounds fantastic, obviously, but as it turns out, this is actually a less expensive construction method. It involves a faster erection time, which is something that we're definitely interested in. But also, to heat and cool the building uses considerably less energy, which energy costs these days are increasing, construction costs are increasing, so the operational cost of the building is very important to us. And if you look at a lot of the large warehouses that are going up, especially in the Detroit area, you'll find that they're either tilt wall construction, which we did look at but didn't find really to be suitable for this project, or our insulated metal panel. And it, depending on your exposure to the marijuana industry, a number of marijuana facilities are also insulated metal panel for various technical reasons. So it's a well-known thing. It produces a very nice finish. It gives you an exterior finish and an interior finish and your building insulation all in one large panel. And further, you actually have fewer air gaps. So one of the things that you find in your house, if you have a drafty house, that's your hot air that you've paid for leaking out. And so the seams of these metal panels are sealed with a different technology. There's a very permanent seal in between these panels, so the air leakage is lower, and again, this knocks on to energy cost. The cladding that we're planning on using on the front to create more of the architectural look is an aluminum composite or some other type of laminate panel, which will come as, again, a monolithic structure that is then hung onto the building and creates that sort of fun look that we've gone for on the front. We were personally very interested or concerned in producing something that fit in, producing something that looks good. I mean, we are, in addition to the motorsports side of our lives, we're developers by trade, and so it was difficult for us to plan our future headquarters in a building that wasn't interesting, that wasn't useful to the community. And as I stated fairly extensively, probably during my rezoning argument, this type of building is not something that occurs a lot within East Lansing. And so to diversify the property inventory in East Lansing, to diversify the potential users that may come to East Lansing, this building just adds something more to the community that isn't there right now. And certainly its proximity to the Attestio project we look at in the long term as a very viable thing. If you've got one business that is heavily invested in advanced automotive testing, should we, for whatever reason, decide to leave that building, we feel like there's a companion use that can be put there. Other suppliers, engineers, developing, automotive development, things like that. So it speaks to the larger site that it sort of creates a space in East Lansing for these sort of businesses to thrive, or potential future businesses to find a home. So that said, I do, certainly listening to the conditions that were applied, we don't necessarily have any issue. Of course, we put the future building on the site plan because in order to get the stormwater calculations approved, it makes far more sense to show anyone reviewing that information how we got to the size of the pond that we did. And as a land use question, detention ponds are becoming larger and larger and larger, and so we have to be very smart about how much impervious surface we apply to the site and the amount of stormwater that we're managing. So certainly we have no issue with the conditions. The only one I would ask is the purpose of number 18, the containment plan.
Yeah, that, may I?
Sorry,
Yes.
I didn't mean to address staff directly.
Just following the
I certainly
protocol.
can't answer it,
Yeah, that's so that's the city's fancy way of saying we just want to see a construction plan in terms of how the where the staging's going to be and
Oh,
that kind of thing. Construction
okay.
staging.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah, I've never heard it called that anywhere else, but that's
And
what- yeah.
containment seems to indicate that I'm releasing something that
Yeah.
must be contained. But no, all of our contractors run a very clean site, and we take great pride in our construction sites not looking like construction sites.
Yep.
So certainly we have no issue with that.
Great. Are there any questions from commissioners for Peter or the applicant? I did have one real quick. So, and thanks for the background on the insulated metal panels. I think that certainly sounds like an improvement over my sheetrock and pink fiberglass insulation that I have in my house. So I was looking at page 40 in the agenda, and it looks like the pitches of the roofs are in opposite directions. Is that correct? I couldn't find it on the...
This one, so the plan that is in front of you this evening, sometimes you agree with your architect and sometimes you do not. And the plan that is in the packet was one that we did not particularly agree with. We much preferred a single strike across the building. It drains a little nicer, it looks a little nicer, and it removes some of the complication of when you build a building like this, a single slope is far easier to construct. I would note that we brought a little bit of the roof out on the north side of the building, the parking lot side of the building, just so that we didn't have sort of a vertical face and then a corner. We got a little bit of an overhang. That's about the amount that we can overhang before you have a structural issue with the panel sort of dangling off into space. So yes, no, the building is planned to be constructed as shown in what I've provided this evening.
And Peter, I don't recall if we resolved this, but at the last meeting, we talked a little bit about the drainage and the eaves troughs in the building. So does the drainage go behind the building
Yes.
primarily? Okay.
Yes, everything is
So
behind the
everything
building.
is tilted towards the back. So if you have a heavy snow, for example, it'll melt and it'll go off the
Everything
back.
is off to the
Got
back.
it. That was mostly for my own curiosity, but thanks for the explanation.
course.
Are there any other questions from commissioners? Seeing none, thank you so much for...
I would like to take just one moment to commend Mr. Menzer for his work on this project and all of the other projects that we've had. We've been with the city for 20 some odd years now, and Mr. Menzer is certainly one of the best people that we've worked with on the staff and was diligent in helping us achieve what we needed to get done here. So I do want to thank him with my last moments of talking here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, I believe a motion is in order. And real quick, Commissioner Hendricks arrived at 7:45 for the minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I will move to approve, or excuse me, move to recommend approval of the site application for Gentilozzi Real Estate to construct a 23,000 square foot industrial building at 3400 West Road based on the findings noted in the staff report and subject to the 19 conditions also listed in the staff report.
So moved by Vice Chair Bowman. Is there a second?
Support.
Seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion on that motion?
I would just reiterate that it's a couple of the things that Mr. Menzer had mentioned, specifically that some of the things that were asked for in the last, at the end of our last meeting, the building elevations, the photometric, and the landscape information. That's all the sort of things that are easily, to my way of thinking, verified by staff when that comes either through the building department or through the planning department. So in as much as they're still missing, they're easy to check off and would presumably be part of the presentation when it finally meets with the city council.
May I speak to that?
Sure.
Yeah, that's part of our role as well. You know, no project gets through our department. So when building, now it won't be me anymore, but when a building permit comes through, we're called quality control, I always like to say, and checking off the things, any outstanding items from approvals, or conditions related to approvals. A building permission doesn't get issued, it just literally can't get issued until planning and zoning signs off on the permit. So we'll have to have all that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay.
Nay. That's me.
Okay. All the ayes have it. Thank you. On to item number 7.2, consideration of a cluster development and site plan application to construct 4 3-unit dwellings in the 7.2 acre central area of the Falcon Pointe Development located west of Chandler Road, south of State Road. Peter? Oh, or Taylor?
Hello. So we have the cluster development plan for Falcon Pointe. They had their public hearing at the February 8th Planning Commission meeting, and then, of course, inclement weather on the second meeting in February. So we're here to go over their proposal, which so they applied for a site plan approval to construct 4 3-unit attached single-story 2-bedroom dwellings in the center area of what is Falcon Pointe. So it's located on the east side of Thoroughbred Lane and the west side of Halter Lane. And the subject property is zoned R2, and there is information in the packet about exactly some more detailed on the history of the site that was inquired about. So that can be seen in the packet as well. The staff memo includes a motion to recommend approval, which can be discussed right after discussion. And it's subject to 12 conditions. Similar to the previous application, many of the conditions are just to connect them to the site plan, so approval to the site plan that was presented, building elevations, applicable conditions from previous approvals, as this was previously approved in 2020, and then it was expired and brought back. So we have that as well. And then various permits, of course, need to be required to be met, and for building and electrical and water and sanitary plans and extensions, connections, and right-of-ways, things like that. The one unique condition is that the site plan should be revised to install 8 parking spaces at the relocated cluster mailbox located at the southeast corner of Palomino Drive and Thoroughbred Lane, which was depicted in the original application back in 2020, and it was not included in this application. So we recommend that approval be included to include those 8 parking spaces. Go ahead.
Do you mind if I supplement a little bit?
No, please do.
Okay. Not that Taylor's doing great. I do want to just call attention to the memo that Taylor prepared for. I'll deal with this. The Falcon Pointe timeline. So I think I noted in the intro thing on the staff memo that we're providing this really just informational, but these are natural questions I think that came up during the discussion that we were here, and then there was at that point there was a contingent of residents from Falcon Pointe, and this is just our effort to provide some background information on kind of how we got here, because it's a complicated development and it involves land being transferred, and so I think this story, the intent here is just to tell the story on how we got here now, that shed a little bit of light, a little bit of background on some of the stories that you heard from some of the residents, and I do want to somewhat separate out those issues. I'm sure that conversation is going to happen here in a second, but the difference between the site plan approval that's in front of you and what the standards of approval are for the site plan itself to construct these units versus kind of the whole the story that can be a little bit of emotionally charged. So just consider that, and our motion and the staff memo kind of ignore that particular aspect of it, but I don't want to say that it's not important. I mean, it's not to say it's not important. We're focused specifically on kind of the site plan and the rules in our ordinance and that. So that's the history a little bit on that. And I wanted to follow up on what Taylor said about the parking. So the proposal that the staff is suggesting is for the developer to install those spaces, and that's because they proposed to install those spaces originally. I personally, and Taylor, in reviewing the plan, we see a challenge in how exactly people get their mail in that area. It's just kind of a dead zone, and it's a dead zone for people, but it's also a spot where there's going to be a lot of traffic coming in and out of the development. So I haven't heard an explanation on that. I'm hoping maybe the applicant will be able to enlighten you on what the plan is for that. But not having that, that's why we're suggesting that they go with the plan they originally submitted in 2020, right?
2020.
Okay, so cool, thank you, I just wanted to provide a little bit more.
Any questions for Peter or Taylor? I believe the applicant's here.
With Atwell, who's the engineer on Falcon Pointe. So I just wanted to, like Peter was saying, shed some light on the intent with parking spaces. The applicant is aware that parking spaces were originally proposed in the 2020 approval of the plans and is offering as an alternative to those 8 perpendicular parking spaces a parallel configuration on not, off of the entrance road where the mailbox clusters are currently proposed in the plan that was submitted in January of 2023. So that would provide a location for 2 or 3 cars to pull off, do the mail, and pull back out onto the residential street.
Any questions from commissioners? Just a second.
Can you tell me what sheet that's on? Thanks.
So we haven't submitted a plan that shows the alternative parking configuration yet. But on sheet 4 of the plans, you can see the location of the mailbox cluster off of Palomino Drive there. There's about 60 feet between an existing hydrant and an existing light pole in that location where some parallel parking pull-off could be installed and that mailbox cluster pushed back off the road.
I mean, it's going to be difficult for us to my way of thinking, to judge on something that's not been presented to us. I personally don't have a problem with that going to city council with that, but it won't be part of our recommendation. At least I don't see it as being part of our recommendation. So
Yep.
that ought to be presented as part of an updated presentation or application to council.
Okay,
When
yeah.
it gets to that point. Unless, Mr. Menzer, sorry, but
No,
is that something that really needs to get passed through here? It doesn't seem to be a significant.
I would advise, if you haven't seen, I haven't seen it either, so I would advise maybe not considering that. You could either talk about what we've got in the packet, have some alternate conclusion, or just basically you could kick it to subject to submittal of a plan approved by council
So
kind of
that's
thing.
actually my question, if I may.
Yeah.
Would that be unusual for us, a detail of that magnitude, to go to council without having been seen by the planning commission?
That's really your comfort level. I don't think it'd be completely unusual. I think it's a small part of the project, but I mean, it's an important component of the project, but probably a small design aspect to have final say from council.
And possibly, Vice Chair, we could add that as a condition.
I don't know if I'm, and this might just be me, but I don't know if I'm comfortable with moving forward in that direction without seeing it. I don't think that's, at least at my time on the commission, the standard practice we've used with other applicants. I think we've seen all the materials before moving in any direction, but open to discussion if others feel differently.
I'll just say briefly, I don't think every proposal that we've referred to council has been 100% finalized, right? Like there is a next level of review, and I'm not sure this necessarily would preclude that from being forwarded to the next level, but I'm open to the conversation if there's agreement among commissioners.
What do you want me to start with, a motion? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Williams.
Different matter. I'm sorry, I missed your name.
Sorry, Kyler Sharon with Atwell.
And were you at the public hearing?
I was not.
So you are not prepared to address the large number of comments from the residents of Falcon Pointe?
I'm aware of some of the comments. If you have a specific question that you want to ask me, I'm prepared to answer.
Well, I think my specific question was, while I'm mindful of our role here, That was a fairly contentious public hearing, and there's been silence from the applicant, so I just wondered if you were prepared to respond.
I'm as prepared as I can be, so, yep.
Well, I'm not going to ask you a specific question. I think you're probably generally aware of the issues that were raised. I can give you my impression, but I think you probably know what I'm asking you.
If it's a traffic calming on the entrance road issue,
No.
That was
Not one
the
of
issue.
them.
I'll ask a more specific question. Have you all continued to have conversations with the neighbors to the north of these properties about the situation that they're facing and a possible solution to that situation?
I'm not aware.
I think the applicant's rep is the civil engineer.
Yeah, I'm
Is that-
civil engineer.
yeah, so
No,
that's-
that's correct,
okay,
so-
all right.
But he's here on behalf of the
Understood.
applicant.
I think the specific issue that commissioners are alluding to is the contention from, and I guess I don't want to use the word contention, but the experiences of residents who were offered eviction notices and then had those rescinded.
Okay. I'm unaware.
Okay, thank you.
It doesn't sound like he's prepared to respond.
That's fair.
I mean,
Yeah, I don't-
I think just to put a little extra on that, those were actually taped to the doors of senior citizens. So, again, I think that might be outside of our lane, but I just thought a response might be in order.
Yeah, and I think I would just second that comment, right, that those considerations are outside of the purview of us as a planning commission, but it disturbed, I think oh, wow, my microphone is doing it too now. I think those experiences and what was expressed to planning commission was disturbing, and I don't know that I would feel comfortable moving forward with approval without some sort of statement or that issue being addressed by the applicant.
Yeah, and that's a good point.
Yeah.
You know, I certainly prepared some comments that I plan to get to later.
Oh, sorry to open that up sooner.
No, it's once we get to that point. So, I guess I'll just open it up to the commission right now. What is the will of the commission? Is there an interest to refer this to a later commission meeting or to potentially take action on this item tonight? Vice Chair?
I would begin with a motion, and I would be happy to make that motion, and then we can either vote that up or down if there's, after discussion. I will move to recommend approval of the site plan and cluster development plan for the 4 3-unit attached 2-bedroom dwellings at the 7.2 acre center of Falcon Pointe between Thoroughbred Lane and Halter Lane, subject to the 12 conditions noted on the staff report.
Second.
Motion by Vice Chair Bowman, seconded by Commissioner Hendricks. Is there any further discussion on that motion? And I hope there is.
I'll start by saying
Vice
that,
Chair.
yep, thanks, that, I mean, and there are any number of things that I might mention about this. I do believe that, in as much as I'm concerned about the residents' welfare, that it's probably not the business of this commission to determine whether or not this application should proceed. The determination of whether or not this application should proceed should not be based on the residents' very legitimate concerns. I think that this commission, and presumably once this is discussed, we can come up with some better wording, but I think that in our part of our recommendation, and it wouldn't necessarily, it doesn't fall into the point of being a condition, but should express that concern that was expressed by convey that concern that the residents had regarding the continuation of this particular project. I don't believe that any of that, in fact, we asked specifically that I don't believe that any of them thought that, the approval or the recommended approval of this particular project was going to necessarily change their condition, their situation, but that I don't think it would be at all inappropriate for this commission to express their concern to council about the situation that's unfolding there or that has unfolded there. That aside, and I don't want to minimize that, I'll tell you that I don't love the form of the product that's being proposed, but I do like the function. It does seem to be exactly the sort of thing that was called for in the housing study. We've got some very modest buildings, and they're all attached, 2-bedroom units. They're small, and they're all attached one to another. And so I'm excited about the idea that there's something that's, there is some potential opportunity for people that are of modest or, or just want to be thrifty, have an opportunity to live within the boundaries of the city. So, don't love the way they look, but I do like the way that they're likely to act.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Sure. I just have a few comments I wrote down before we open this up to the rest of the commissioners. So, yeah, I think these neighbors are in a terrible position, right? Terrible circumstances. For me, they were stories that had a real impact, and I really feel for them. But when I look at the Planning Commission's role, right, of looking at the criteria of an application, looking at the engineering, traffic, appropriateness for the site, things like that. Also we look at the need for housing, in particular on vacant land, which this sits on. We previously approved this same project some years back. And I don't think we can add a condition to this project about, neighboring land that has nothing to do with this particular project. So wanted to comment that. But I do think that council's in position to take a broader review of this, and I urge FP investors to work with the impacted residents on a potential solution. I'm not a lawyer, right, but so I can't comment on the possible legal issues that were brought up at the last meeting, and I won't comment on those. But purely in the scope of this application for this site, what it's proposing for the community, the neighbors to the north of there notwithstanding, I'm in favor of what they're proposing. However, I have to send along my comments to council and staff and whoever about the conduct that has happened there and the real world impact that's happening to our neighbors to the north there. And ultimately, it's my hope that both this project happens that we're talking about tonight, and I think it'll address a real housing gap in the community. But I hope that the situation with those neighbors is somehow amicably resolved or work toward a potential solution, either by future discussions between the two parties or at the next level. But I'm certainly open to other commissioners and feedback. Just after kind of wrestling with this mentally for a few weeks, that's ultimately where I landed. So, any further discussion?
I'd like to just add, if nobody, I don't want to cut in, I don't want to take a second bite before, but I'm of a similar mind as Commissioner Lapine that the idea of parallel parking as opposed to clustered parking is a fine one. Would have liked to have seen that as part of the proposal here, and that so I'm disinclined to add an additional potential condition to the motion without seeing what's being proposed.
Yeah, and I think that's it's always hard on the end. I think that's where my mind goes on this one as well, because while I was not at the last meeting where there were concerns shared from citizens, I did read up on it and saw the minutes and a couple of recordings, and I think we would be remiss, given, I think, to Commissioner Williams' point, that we have not heard any statement or feedback at all from the developer, that there's that piece which might be outside the purview of our commission, but I would also say we haven't seen this amended plan, and I think that is grounds to at least push this out and have it heard at another commission meeting. That would be my inclination, but obviously I'm open to other perspectives.
Would you care to make a motion on that?
You want me to use words at 8:07? Yes. I would propose we see this, we see this consideration at a future planning commission meeting when a full application with the amended parking plan has been submitted by the developer. But I probably used the wrong words.
I'll second it anyway.
Okay, before we get to that, we have to vote down the first motion procedurally. All those in favor of,
So I think you talked about doing a roll call.
okay, yeah,
That's your call. Or not.
but this is just a motion to.
I think if you want to leave it in a motion to table, that take precedence for the motion that's on the floor.
Didn't we just say motion to discuss?
That's okay.
Are you going to consider?
Sari, how do you cancel a motion?
Could we just, I heard that as a motion to table.
Yeah, and I seconded it.
So can't we just move forward and vote on that?
I don't see why not. All right, all those in favor of tabling this to a future planning commission meeting, that is the discussion item. I think I will do a roll call vote for this one.
It's discussion.
Oh, any discussion on that motion? Commissioner Williams?
I intend to vote for this. I think it's appropriate. I'd like to see a complete proposal, and I'd like to see the applicants come forward and at least be prepared to respond. Again, I understand our role, but these residents received no response even when the applicants were present. And given the concerns they raised and the claims they raised, and they did allude to some legal issues, the fact that they'd lived in their homes and made significant improvements, including attached garages, without leases on the land that those sat on. I didn't do any legal research on those issues either, but I would think that at least some recognition of the concerns by the applicant would be appreciated and appropriate.
Any further discussion?
If I,
Peter?
oh, I defer to council.
That's right.
What's,
Could you, he just wants to hear days.
Peter, what's the date for the next?
It would be the 20th?
Yeah.
Where are we here?
Yeah, the next meeting. The next,
Okay.
I think it'd be the 22nd, right?
I'm looking. Yeah, yep, March 22. So you would postpone to, or table this to March 22, subject to provision of a detailed plan showing the proposal for parking that wasn't provided tonight?
If possible, I would say subject also to the developers being present to address these comments. If that's possible. I know I'm sure that we can't force anyone to come to a council meeting.
Yeah, I don't think that would be a condition, but I think certainly that would be up to us when they're here before us next time, or if they're not here before us next time.
And we certainly could pass that request along to the developer and strongly encourage them to be in the room.
Please do. Thank you. Commissioner Lapine, would you like to redo that motion?
I move to.
It's March 22nd, by the way.
Yep. March 22.
I move to table the discussion tonight and instead bring this back up at the Planning and Zoning Commission scheduled for March 22nd.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Lapine, seconded by Commissioner Denault. Is there any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I think we should do a roll call vote.
Okay, I'll do that right now. Chair Sullivan.
Yes.
Vice Chair Bowman.
Aye.
Commissioner Lapine.
Aye.
Commissioner Hendricks. Commissioner Boyd.
Aye.
Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Denault.
Aye.
The ayes have it.
All right. Thank you. So we will see this at the March 22nd meeting. Thank you. On to item 7.3, discussion on the potential phased implementation of the Shaping the Avenue draft form-based code. Taylor?
Sure.
Yeah, Taylor's going to take this. She's been doing a lot of great work on this item. I just want to note for a couple of the attendees that are here tonight, this is really kind of a revisiting previous conversations that have happened. There's no action that's intended to immediately come out of this. This is kind of our reintroduction to Shaping the Avenue concept and what was discussed several years ago, and then discussion about how we may see it moving forward in the future. I just wanted to get a little context first. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so like Peter said, we're just going over, today we'll be going over the proposed boundaries to implement a phased implementation of Shaping the Avenue. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight. And then at future meetings, we intend to bring back discussion of the language itself for review, but I'll go over next steps at the end of this meeting, at the end of this presentation in more depth. So here's an overview of what we'll discuss in this presentation: why implement Shaping the Avenue, the phased implementation itself, the area, and then the potential boundaries for the first phase of implementation. So last meeting we discussed what was a form-based code, and it's primarily, just to sum up, it's a code that primarily utilizes structural design and features focus more so on streetscape to guide uses and development. So why implement a form-based code? It creates cohesive guidelines for envisioning a specific area of a city. It creates standardized and reliable development expectations, which can increase confidence in development in an area and also decrease administrative review timelines, which can speed along development. And so those are discussed. We discussed those more in depth previously at the last meeting. And then, so we can talk about more specifically, there's the larger area, and then, but that could be implemented all at once, or what we propose is, which is a phased implementation. And so why that kind of phased implementation instead of all at once would be the ease of an implementation that's on a smaller scale. And so we considered several factors when selecting an area: residential versus commerce, rental restriction overlay districts, housing types, current and future zoning districts, the age of structures, historic district overlays, or historic district boundaries, things like that. So what we're kind of going to discuss, are there better suited areas for first steps? I'll go into some discussion of what is in the area. If so, where? If no, is the proposed area an ideal size? We can talk about boundaries, and we'll talk about that later on. So this is the overall proposed STA area, which is in the draft language of the STA packet, which can be found online. You can just Google the city's plans, and Shaping the Avenue will come up, and you can just click that link. So this map shows the overall STA area, and overlaid on top of the boundaries are the historical district boundaries, the rental restriction overlay boundaries, and that's the rental restriction overlays are those red boundaries, and then the historic districts are those colored areas. Those green squares are landmark structures, so they're included in the historic district overall boundaries, but they're specific units instead of being included in the overall district. But I digress. When considering an area to begin introducing form-based code, we were really looking for areas that show a mix of commerce but had a lot of residential to introduce form-based code in a variety of ways, so commerce and residential areas, but primarily residential. And then we're looking at areas that are rising to be most suitable outside of those areas, so outside of the HDC, outside of the RO districts. And so the two areas that really arise are circled in red, the proposed area to the north, and then the East Village District. The East Village District, which was touched on earlier by one of the audience members, what has existing a form-based code. form, which was introduced in 2006. And there hasn't been much change in the area, except for the large hub development. And that's primarily because the form-based code at the time was developed and designed to be utilized in a master planning or master development form. So somebody who comes in and purchases the entire area and designs it collectively all at once. There's previous meetings or previous discussions on the history that gets more in depth. If you'd like to see videos on that in previous meetings, we can get into that later if there's questions. And then, so the area to the north is the circular area. Is the area that we're going to discuss a little bit more today. So it's outlined in green in this map. This map also shows the frontages, the different frontages that are proposed. So this is zoomed in. So the northern boundary would be Ann Street, the southern boundary would be East Grand River, the western boundary is the rear lot lines on the west side of Orchard Street, and then the eastern boundary is the rear lot lines on the east side of Spartan Avenue. So those split down, the edges, the eastern and western edges are actually on the dividing lines, not on a street, so they're on rear lot lines, as opposed, in between streets, as opposed to using streets as the boundaries themselves. And then this shows the proposed frontages in the area. So it ranges from R3, R4, M2, and M3. And that corresponds with the last time we introduced the topic, we went more in depth on what each of those offers. But they primarily offer similar density increases they mirror the future land use designations in the master plan, but they are form-based code frontages, so like we mentioned earlier, as opposed to zoning districts that focus only on use, they also include design elements and structural guidelines, which is a key component of form-based code in itself. This shows where the HDCs are in the area. So the blue area that overlaps with the proposed area is the Bailey Historic District. The red also shows the rental restriction overlays, and those are actually outside of the proposed area. So the only area in the entire proposed area that is in a historic district is those northwestern streets along Orchard and Kedzie. Previously, Commissioner Wagner has mentioned his concern for those areas, so that's something that we can discuss later. But I feel like it's important to note that he has specifically mentioned those, and he's not here this evening. So, and then for this area, so here we have a rental map. So this is where it shows which houses have rental licenses and which don't. There are 84% of the dwellings in this area, proposed area, have actually rental licenses, so only a handful of or about 16% of them are owner-occupied. So that's something to consider, one of the reasons why this is a proposed area. And then most of the houses in the area are single-family rentals with some duplexes and apartments, primarily located along the southern edge. So those green ones at the bottom are apartment complexes, and those are primarily near that block of commerce at the bottom along East Grand River. And then building types, this is kind of what I was talking about. Many of them are single family, but a lot of them are, there's a large percentage of duplexes as well. And then group homes. So group homes include co-ops or fraternities and sororities. And there's many of those, again, closer to East Grand River on the southern edge. This is the current zoning map for the area. Much of it is R2, which is medium density single family. That allows single family homes at a higher density than R1, so medium density. And then that darker blue along Fry Street, Stoddard Avenue, and Spartan Avenue is R3, which allows for single family and two family homes, so duplexes, so even higher density. And then along the bottom, that purple color is RM32, which is city center multiple family, which allows for apartments and for fraternities, sororities, group homes, and the like. And then that yellow is B2, which are commerce and retail. The future zoning, like I mentioned previously, mirrors the proposed frontages. So you have the R1, R2, R3, R4, and then M2 and M3 in the area as well. So those are mirrored on both of those. And here's some of those facts that I've mentioned some of them already. The number of dwellings in total in this proposed area is 261. The number of owner-occupied is 43, so that's 16%. The area as it stands now has a rental occupancy potential of 331 individuals. So we calculate that based on the type of rental licenses that currently exist in the area. And then many of the houses, the majority of the houses, were built in 1940. So the average is 1940. And then that brings us to questions. I will ask these questions to us, and then we can discuss them after I've discussed what the next steps are for this. So I'll ask the questions and then finish up with what potentially could be next, and then we can discuss it. The council can discuss. Okay, if that works for everyone. So
Taylor, could we ask some questions first before we get to those questions? If
questions,
that's okay.
certainly. Huh? You were close. I was like, all collectively. We can ask questions now. Certainly.
You're so close, yeah.
She was so close.
All right, before I
Neither.
ask anything, are there any other questions from commissioners?
I had
Commissioner Denault?
Thank you, sorry. I had previously asked the last time that we addressed this, when the last historic resources survey of the entire city of East Lansing was, and I just wanted to know if we had an answer to that.
So we did look into it, and the historic studies on East Lansing are really only done to initiate the HDCs. So whenever one of those is initiated by the residents themselves, then one of those is undertaken, and that can take a year to 18 months to just complete itself. But there hasn't been one on this area, but there hasn't been one on the entire city either. So it's really just pockets, and those later came to fruition to become HDCs. So
the reason that I ask, and I did not make this clear when I asked it the first time, and I just wanted to make it clear, is a lot of mid-century structures are now coming into a period of significance and being recognized as historic structures, and East Lansing has many beautiful examples of mid-century architecture. And I am concerned, especially for those along the Grand River corridor, that we will lose those if we implement a form-based code, or that those won't be recognized as the historic assets that they are. So I just wanted us to keep that in mind.
if you'd like me to address that. So for the HDC process, to form a historical district, that's open to any neighborhood in the city that qualifies and applies for that process and undergoes that historic survey. So that is a possibility. It's on the table in terms of things that a neighborhood could do.
But you can't, not individual structures.
There is a process to register individual structures or protect individual structures for historic purposes, but that's like the National Historic Registry, or creating a landmark structure. As I mentioned previously, there's here, let me shoot the map.
Yep.
Yeah, so those green spaces are actually landmark structures. So those are unique individual ones that applied for and underwent that revision or that review process with historical experts and preservationists, and then qualified to be considered preserved. And so those are subject to the similar guidelines that historic districts are.
Having approved, or nominated and successfully had one approved.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to
it's totally
over-explain.
fine. I don't have my resume out.
I'm so sorry to
No, it's
over-explain.
totally fine. But that's what I think it's important to clarify that process, right, and have it publicly documented for all of those who watch this or listen at home.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Vice Chair?
It sounds to me like Ms. Van Winkle's direction is that if the Historic District Commission is concerned about potential loss of resources, then it would be incumbent upon them to organize a study committee and undertake the actual study and make recommendation to City Council and Planning Commission. That your point is well taken, but that sort of, if that's the concern, then I think it's sort of if it's not listed, it's not considered protected, as you know. Yeah. Thanks.
Any other questions? Taylor, I had a few comments and questions. My mind's just going back to all of the various work group meetings and development sessions we had on this. And the entire premise of a form-based code, right, is to make it easier to develop, more developer-friendly. So I personally thought that the comments from some of the property owners were interesting about their perspective on a form-based code, in particular in regard to mixed use. So, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but the premise essentially is you're setting up a process to have a certain characteristic of criteria you look for and what the aesthetic of a building is, but the uses of that building are more flexible. So I don't recall, are there any specifics in there that mandate any mixed use of buildings under certain zoning categories?
There are, I believe, one or two that require, at the higher densities, require mixed use on the bottom floor, but they facilitate like a special use permit to exempt themselves from it. But many of them allow for mixed use, but don't require it. But I can go into more detail about it.
Vice Chair?
And this is Commissioner Williams nodding. There was a sort of a sub topic that was associated with the M3 frontage that was called the storefront frontage or something like that. And so in those cases, and I don't see them on, maybe there's not actually any in this particular range.
Oh, M3, yeah.
Yeah, so there's certainly M3, but there were specific parts within M3 that was called the storefront, the storefront frontage. And so in those cases, it would be, who asked the question? That in those cases, that there would be expectation that there would be an actual storefront with a certain percentage of glass and certain transmissibility of the glazing. And so there were some places like that. Again, I don't see it on this map here, but I think that largely because it was those properties that were closer to to MAC, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I appreciate the explanation. And Taylor, for the last version of the language we had, what extent of a modification of a structure would trigger the requirements of a form-based code? Do you know?
What percentage specifically? I'll have to verify that.
But is it, obviously we wouldn't, I think, want to grandfather properties, out of the form-based code requirements, although, everything's on the table, I suppose. But if somebody's just doing an addition, or if they're making other modifications to their home, would that trigger all of the requirements of the form-based code?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
But I will have to check the specific language as to what percentage or what scale of development would trigger frontage.
But it was a relatively small percentage. I want to say maybe as little as 10% or 25%. It wasn't a lot.
So if you're doing
The idea was that the intention was that, we're going to make this move, and that, that sort of small modification. Again, don't quote me in terms of percentages, but that there was the intention was that if the changes were going to be made, they were going to be made indeed.
Yes, I also remember is that was among a list of several significant policy issues that we thought should be addressed by City Council before there was a move forward to implement the plan. So that and many other issues, because of the way this would create so many non-conforming structures within the plan.
Right. You guys had so much fun in those sub-work groups.
Yeah.
And I'm also open to the concept of paring down a lot of the specifics, but then it becomes sort of how many things do you pare down before this really isn't a form-based code, and you defeat the purpose of having a form-based code. So I recall those conversations, and those are difficult conversations. But, I appreciate the perspective that you both brought tonight, and, it's helpful, and a lot of the memories of the meetings that we had in this are coming back. But and Taylor, thanks for the presentation. I don't have any more questions unless any other commissioners do. We can move on to your more significant questions.
Okay, I do
Oh,
have
Commissioner
one,
Williams.
and I guess it's a follow-up to my comment, which is, a couple of years ago, we got to the point where we thought those policy questions really needed to be wrestled with before we knew whether this was even viable, whether we should spend any more time on this. And because of COVID and other issues, I don't believe that ever happened with council. So did I miss something, or?
It has not gone to council. As Darcy had mentioned last time, it was drafted to go to council, and then COVID had hit, or there was some large disruption that prevented it from happening, or tabled it for a while, indefinitely. But yes, so in terms of that language, we intend to bring those items back to discuss at the next, we can address the comments brought up in discussion today, and then at the next meeting that we discuss the STA, we'll discuss the languages, those kinds of specific issues that were brought up, that were left over from the last subcommittee meetings and that list that you're referring to, and kind of bring new members up to date and remind existing members who are more familiar with it, what exactly those issues were, and bring that up for discussion. So we'll have a language-focused meeting in the near future about this as well. Thanks.
Mine is just more of a
Commissioner Lepine?
thank you, more of a comment, I suppose, than a question. But one of the things that I would be remiss not to point out, given that Commissioner Wagner is not here, is while I completely understand the need for obviously the Shaping the Avenue and the form-based code, I continue to be very concerned by the proposed implementation area map as it pertains to the area between Albert and Ann Street for Orchard and Kedzie. You are encroaching upon family homes and neighborhoods that are rooted in the community, and I think expanding some of this continues to make it easier for developers to offer things that are beneficial for students and not necessarily for the taxpayers of our city. So I would be much more open to having conversations that does not include those sections that very much encroach on those family neighborhoods. I know this is a big topic of discussion with the Bailey Neighborhood Association, and I think some of those policy decisions and discussions that Commissioner Williams alluded to would be really helpful to get some discussion going with council before we continue to grapple with this piece.
Any further discussion? Questions? Seeing none. Taylor, I think we can go ahead and have a conversation about these two questions you have here.
Yeah, so you touched on many of those questions. One of the questions was the phased implementation process itself, if that was something that the commission wanted to go forward with, discussing, and then the boundaries, as Lepine has already brought up, was another item to discuss as well. That feedback would be helpful for guidance on expanding, constricting, moving, twisting. We'll refrain from bopping.
Sure, I'll start.
Vice Chair.
It seems to me, thank you, that we've long talked about, my expectation was that this was going to see an awful lot more public presentation before any vote was taken on, and I think that that's still the intention. Whether that starts with, in fact, maybe that's what Commissioner Williams is talking about, these sort of policy-related questions. Maybe it starts with just a thought. Presentation starts with council, at which time, once they've grown, been reintroduced or introduced to this ordinance, those questions are put to them, and with the expectation that there will be some sort of, resolution regarding that. At that time, presuming that those are answered, in a manner that's deemed appropriate, then the roadshow begins, right? We're pushing out to these areas, particularly the places that Commissioner Lepine has talked about and Commissioner Wagner's talked about. Ultimately, the people that are impacted by this should have some say. I mean, ultimately, the decision is going to have to be made by council, and it's not typically put to a vote, sort of amongst the residents, but it seems like let's get our answers from council first, and then if they're comfortable with it, and only then would it be pushed out to ultimately to the residents. I'm going to step on to your third question. I have every confidence that you're going to continue, understaffed though you may be. I don't see this getting back to council or back to this board before in March or April. I know you probably wrote this last month, and I'd like to see it move forward. At the very least, I'd like to see some resolution as to whether or not we implement it, because we did work pretty hard on getting the text in order. But I think that before we talk about expansion or constriction, it needs to, the council needs to answer some questions, and then ask the people that are going to be directly impacted by it, and the people that are just outside the area, or people that are just generally interested in form-based codes generally. My feeling right now is that it should continue to proceed, even though we've pared way back on the planned implementation area. But I would be inclined to attend those meetings just to hear what people have to say, like Mr. Hagan and Ms. Marr, that I think there's some legitimate skepticism. I think that perhaps some of it's not well. I think there's some legitimate skepticism, and I think that there's some misunderstandings, and so that those things would be discussed, and ultimately people would give the opportunity to make their piece known. Yeah. Thanks.
Taylor? Oh, sorry, Commissioner Williams?
I was very new to this work when this project rolled out, and I was sort of taken aback by it because, and mostly about process. I mean, we started this process, again, because of a grant, going to, I think, to echo Alice's comment earlier about this is chapter 2 of letting grants lead us, right? And I just kept thinking, we don't know what the community wants. And now after 2 plus 3 years of a lot of hard work trying to twist a product by consultants who didn't know what the community wanted and didn't know what we wanted into something we thought might be good to go out and find out what people's reaction was. Now we sit wrestling with questions when we never knew what the community wanted, still don't know what the political will is of city council, and I'm just unable to answer many questions without knowing some of those basic bottom line things. It's always felt backwards to me, and it still sort of feels that way. Despite all that work, all that time we spent, I do think that there is a lot of good work that was done, and I do think it's a much better product than we started with, and we certainly had the best of intentions. And I hate to see it just go sit on a shelf somewhere. I think it's worthy of a lot of conversation. But again, I'd like to know where the political leadership is. They planted it to us years ago. We don't even have the same people here or on the council. So, oh, don't remind me. Really?
We had a couple of sort of remote-ish meetings during COVID. So
yes, we did. Yes.
But we were pretty far along before that.
Yes, we did. We were very diligent about doing what we were asked to do, but we still don't know if anybody wants the work. So, I guess I'm just sharing my frustration.
I think those are really helpful comments. I'm trying to think of an analogy there. As a former legislative staffer, it almost seems like at the staff level, we're working on legislation that we don't even know the legislator wants yet, right? Yep. So, do I support phased implementation? Sure, if that's what the public wants, right? Like, ideally, I'd like to see a more comprehensive, broader implementation in a perfect world, but I don't know that that's what the public wants. The area that's proposed before us, I think I'm comfortable with, but just having a form-based code doesn't necessarily mean all the properties in that area are going to change, right? Like, there's certain things that have to happen in order for those to have to make that transition. I don't think it's necessarily student-focused, although I will point out students do pay taxes too, albeit indirectly. I don't know. I think we've had this discussion a handful of times now, and I want to move forward on something, but I just don't know, what's appropriate for us to do at this point. I think there is a lot of promise here, and we put a ton of work into this over years, and I would, kind of like the Valley Court thing, right? I would hate to see just nothing happen with it, but that's where I'm at.
One more question.
Commissioner Williams?
I'd like a better understanding now, this many years in, what the advantages are to the city of having a form-based code under the MEDC's redevelopment ready process. And what are the disadvantages of not having a form-based code?
I guess it depends. I'll attempt to answer that very briefly. I think it depends on what shoes you're in. And I end up kind of riding the line between sometimes a development world and being defender of the city or community's world. And from a development perspective, I think it gives you kind of that there's a confidence there for investment, to knowing what the rules are and kind of knowing the process ahead, knowing where the community has, because in that case, there's still an approval process, but it's just kind of when the approval happens, up front versus later.
I'm not really asking about a form-based code pros
Okay.
and cons. I'm asking about the redevelopment ready process through MEDC.
Right.
What are the advantages of getting that redevelopment ready designation?
We can articulate that. There's a list. We can articulate that, what the advantage, what the program, or at least what they say the advantages are to the program. We went down when I first started at the city, that was an early initiative, and not you're following exactly what I'm doing, but I presented to council several months ago about exactly that, kind of what administrative approvals look like, and frankly, that's the precursor, that's the underlying policy decision behind form-based code and behind redevelopment-ready communities. That's what they want to see, is that there are these administrative approvals aligned with the development. So sorry I started off the wrong path there, but
No, that's quite all right.
that's the feedback that we got from council, and you can watch the video, was not strong on going in that direction. And I can tell you, I worked at Meridian Township before this, and then they said the same things. It's a change in kind of the decision structure and where the perceived power or authority comes from in making land use decisions. And that's a difficult bridge to cross.
We spent a lot of time on that page, that chart that's in our draft.
Yeah.
A lot of time.
I remember that.
So that's a much longer conversation that has to happen, but we've dipped the toe in the water, and so far I didn't get a strong sense that was the direction they wanted to move in. But that was really just the first discussion. That was just one presentation at one meeting, kind of this is how things could look, and the intent there is to follow up with more. So I know that doesn't paint exactly the picture maybe you're looking for, but that's where I see it today. While I guess I have the microphone, it's in front of me. Really quick, I just wanted to double down on what Commissioner Bowman was saying about the process, and he nailed exactly how I was envisioning this going, recognizing that we're way behind where we need to be, and that the public engagement process just hasn't happened yet in any meaningful way. So this is our attempt to just kind of get this back in front of you, say, hey, remember form-based code and shaping the avenue? And then talk about where it could go, see if we're comfortable with the language that's as presented. But I agree, there's a precursor here that's kind of like, the council hasn't seen. We recently did find the letter that you referenced, so Darcy was able to share that letter with us with kind of the outstanding issues from the last time this came along. And but much like the Valley Court project I talked about earlier, it needs to get in front of council so that they're aware of the initiative and kind of give us the blessing to put more time and more effort into this, because without that, we're kind of dead in the water on this. So that's, after this kind of reintroduction, that was the goal, was go back to them, get a warm thumbs up, thumbs down on proceed. We like where you're going with this, proceed. And then the real, it's a long road, but then the real work starts on getting into the details of the ordinance itself, deciding whether or not we like the ordinance now at this point is 5 years old, and the detailed provisions of that ordinance, because that's I think the educational gap that we've got to fit between the people that own the property here and literally what does this mean for you and the investment and what the real property and the land. So all that has to happen. I just want to acknowledge that we recognize that that's true, and there's a lot more work to do.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh, that sounded somber.
Yeah.
I don't mean it that way.
Any additional questions? Okay. All right, seeing none. We have no new business, so moving on to item number 9. Commissioner concerns?
Well,
Commissioner Lapine?
it's not a concern. It's a thanks to Peter for all of his work on the commission. It's a funny story, but I was talking to a coworker today who's actually on the Meridian Township Economic Development group, and he remembered you when you were at Meridian Township, and he was talking about what a loss it was for
for you to come to the city of East Lansing, and we were talking about how we now feel the same way, and so I very much enjoyed working with you, and you've taught me a lot about this process as kind of a newbie on the commission. So very much appreciative of the work you did for the city, and wish you all the best in your new role.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo that. And I guess it is a little bit of a concern, too. I'm concerned that you're leaving, Peter, and I'm concerned that so many other people are leaving. I'm very happy that Taylor and Rebecca are still with us, but I also want to thank you. I think I mentioned to you early on in your tenure how much I appreciated your written reports. They're just really well done, and you have a lot of attention to detail, and I like the way they're organized. I like the references that you make back to the code and other issues, and I've just really appreciated them. So thank you very much. We will definitely miss you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
So I would also, when you and I met last, I think I told you that, I told Mr. Menzer that I thought he had pretty big shoes to fill in his predecessor, David Haywood, and that he's done a remarkable job in doing so. He's brought innovative ideas and relatively simple, sort of like publishing or making public the various items that were likely to be presented to the Planning Commission and the Zoning Board is sort of just in a public portal. And it seems like, why didn't we do that before? But I also shared Commissioner Williams' concern is that, and I don't mean to take anything away from you, but I'm concerned that your departure is one of many of a seemingly endless stream of departures that has happened in the city, and I feel that it's indicative of a larger problem. That I'm not asking you to make any comments on this, of course, but that I hope that there is a resolution coming to that potential problem, but I can't say that I believe that that's the case. And so I will miss you very much. I hope to see you at some future American Planning Association of Michigan conference soon, and wish you best in your new position.
Thank you.
Sure.
Additional comments?
I won't go on. I think as long as everyone else, because I've known you for the shortest amount of time, so I will keep my comments short and brief. But I just want to also show my appreciation and my thanks for all of the help that you've provided to me in my early days here on the Planning Commission. So thank you.
Thank you very much. In closing, I love working with all of you. In another dimension, I stay and we get a lot of stuff done. But I don't do things alone. I have a lot of credit to the staff that we've got here at the city. So everyone's been very supportive, including Darcy, that's not here anymore. Certainly helped me a lot when I first came on board and learning the ropes. And East Lansing, this is its own kind of thing sometimes. So it was really helpful to know the ins and outs of that. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, and I'll just go last. Everybody stole my thunder already. But yeah, I'm so appreciative of the work you did with us, and just your personality and your relationship with everyone on the commission. I truly enjoyed attending the meetings with you and having conversations and geeking out over development items. And I wish you the best of luck in your next endeavor. And it's really unfortunate to lose you, but I wish you the best and thank you once again.
Thanks.
All right, I think that brings us to item 10, adjournment. Is there a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Moved by Commissioner Denal,
Support.
seconded by Commissioner Williams. Any discussion? Seeing none, we are adjourned at, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Adjourned at 8:51 p.m.